and I'm absolutely delighted to have Rob Harris with me today. Rob, thanks so much for your time, giving up your precious time, particularly in these last few days before you head off to Germany for the Euros. I'm sure it's a very busy time, but massive thank you for taking the time out of your day to have a chat with us today. It's much appreciated.
Yeah, good to join you.
Rob, could we kick off by just hearing from you a little bit about your role at Sky? You know, I think in the promotional text, I explained to everybody that you used to be at APTN, and now you're at Sky as a sports correspondent. Can you tell us a bit about your role at Sky, please?
Yeah, so I'm the sports correspondent at Sky News. So that's talking about sport to the masses and ultimately covering the big events, the big news stories. It can be the highs, it can be the other side that perhaps is the more accountability side of sports journalism as well, but also those big moments like at World Cups, Olympics, and things like that. And a lot of it is live reporting. A lot of it for the main focus is the evening package reports as well, and also big form interviews that we can put out in long form too. So yeah, I'm covering sport on Sky News, which is separate but interlinked to Sky Sports and Sky Sports News, which can confuse some people.
No, it's an important point of difference, and we'll maybe drill into that a little bit later on where there is ever crossover with content, but I think a good distinction to make up front. Now, obviously, you mentioned there about covering World Cups, covering Olympics. You know, we've got an amazing summer of sport ahead with the Euros and the Olympics, to name just two major tournaments this summer. When are you heading off to Germany, and how's your prep looking?
Yeah, due to during this week. I mean, it's probably had less of a build-up to other tournaments, which might surprise some people, but often when a tournament has various challenges with its logistics or preparation, it means there's actually more focus on the country. But when everything's smooth, the country can be talked about less, which might be a good or a bad thing. And how a country talks about itself when there are negative issues perhaps is even harder.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Those classic images of accommodation not being ready, which used by different channels of media in the build-up to a tournament like the last World Cup, is a kind of a weird way of actually building attention ahead of it, as well as obviously the other issues in the build-up to Qatar.
Although the German embassy have been doing stuff and making themselves available here and in Germany as well, so it doesn't mean you don't cover that. You just, it's uplifting.
Of course. And what was your relationship? You know, this is a PRCA event, so what is your relationship like with PR professionals? And also kind of bridging from that into how do they capture your attention? I guess that question opens up the opportunities for you to talk about some common mistakes, but also some of the best practice which you see from those people that share stories with you or guest opportunities with you, which really kind of stand out from the other pitches you receive. I'm sure there are many.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, obviously there are different strands of what we're doing and what is coming in from the PR side. There can be the reactionary crisis management, dealing with those news issues. And then also the more sort of celebratory, it's working with athletes, telling athlete stories as well. Primarily, sometimes it's those not thinking about the medium. So on a sort of basic level, it's when we're just being sent VNR or even a non-video press release text and asked, can we get this on? And you say, well, what are you offering? Who is there to interview to go with this? How will it turn into a piece that you can imagine? This isn't the only program, but it's one to think towards. How will it get in the news at 10 headlines as a sort of 2.5 minute piece? Obviously, longer versions then appear on TikTok and Insta and all the other social platforms too. So in part, that is also understanding what we are. Not only we are a news channel with UK and a global audience, free to air as well, which might be surprising to many people. Sky is completely free, streaming on YouTube as well, so it's there for everyone to see. And also, we're not just linear old media in the sense of being, I think it's like the second biggest English language news provider on TikTok with 6 million followers. So, realizing, that we're also reaching that sort of influencer audience as well, while also getting the linear and TV coverage. But it's often not necessarily thinking about how that will get on air or what's best in terms of an interview, giving enough notice in advance as well, realizing it's a crowded sports agenda, particularly if you aren't football as well, that maximizing your chance of getting on is with coverage is knowing as long in advance possible, filming in advance, knowing the stories in advance, be able to sell it internally as well. And the fact it can get good play if you are. And also, again, particularly if you're not football, seizing on those moments that you are in the spotlight. Put it like this: no one has contacted me from athletics this week, despite the successes of the European Championships. You could say it could be for me to reach out, but I think if you are a smaller sport, you need to sort of take that bit extra. I mean, say smaller athletics, it should be big, but has been consumed, by football, as we've seen with many sports.
Yeah, I guess that bridges, we know football is the dominant sport still. I mean, the Olympics will get a lot of coverage, partly because of that free-to-air exposure you alluded to earlier, albeit across other channels. I guess, just picking up on what you said there, what is it that smaller, marginal, but again, those are very pejorative words, but you know what I mean, non-football sports, how do they punch above their weight? Is it about, does the caliber of guest always trump everything else? Or is there a real space for creativity here? Again, bearing in mind we're talking to, dedicated PR professionals on this call. What is it they can take from this, which will maybe help them elevate their campaign or the sport they work with, so it is punching above its weight, maybe?
I mean, obviously, there's always the big names, and particularly if they've been less exposed, hearing from them after a time they haven't been. But those who aren't particularly stars might have very good personal stories to tell.
Mm-hmm.
It's not to detract from their sporting performance, because even, in football and rugby, it's often the sort of the off-field the sort of personal story that helps to bring in the audience as well. So, there can be those compelling stories, and, something in their own personal life, something that challenges they've gone through, just something something that bit extra that is there, or something that is very, newsworthy. They might be taking on a cause, some activism. They might even have an issue in their sport, and it might not always be good for the sport that issue comes to light, some elements, but it actually puts that sport in the headlines. Doesn't mean it can, as we see with things like equal conditions pay debates, that can elevate some of those sports in the headlines that aren't always as well.
It's a really good point. I think we're doing a lot, as you can imagine, with former footballers at the moment in the build up to and through the Euros. We're going to be doing a lot of brand activations. But, there's always, if it's a former player, using football as an example, given the Euros on the horizon, there's always that question, but also what else are they up to? What have they been doing recently? Because, of course, recognizable names, faces, voices are helpful. And obviously the relevance of talking to them during a tournament, because of course you'll ask about England's hopes or other home, Scotland's hopes or beyond, but also you kind of want to go beyond that and find out what else they're up to at the moment to give the audience a bit more understanding of why you're talking to them now, which I think is good. So would the recommendation be that when you do work with a brand ambassador or spokesperson recruited for a campaign, they need to be fairly fleet-footed and willing to talk about beyond just maybe the guardrails of the campaign?
Yeah, I mean, it depends what it is. I mean, it's very much always not wishing to put people in a spot. I mean, I can, think about Qatar, where obviously there was huge many issues around the World Cup there, but you knew when to, first of all, judge it based on who you were speaking to. Also, the moment. Not everyone has to be asked about human rights issues in Qatar, because also it's not necessarily that issue of the day. It's also, it's not something they engage in necessarily. So actually you're judging who you're interviewing, and that can be even at sort of top manager level, how much they engage on bigger issues and how useful it is actually to even ask either they have an opinion or not. I mean, I interviewed Gareth Bale a few weeks ago. Helpfully, it was before he did the load of media around the Champions League final, and you hadn't heard from him really since retiring. So partly we wanted to do it as a big sort of celebratory, what have you been up to, celebrate your career. And then he surprised me, had opinions. So I asked him just about broader thoughts on football, and he was getting into discussion about, is there too much football? Is it harmful for players in terms of physicality and mental health, as well as VAR chat as well. But it meant that I got an entire day of coverage on a Monday the other week, featuring our headlines from morning to night. Also, some hours it featured a sort of a 7-minute version of that interview in full form as well, rather than cut down. Which also showed exclusivity that gave that, and it was connected with MasterCard, and it did feature a reference to the pledge ball that they're working on sustainability, and he actually had a good answer on the campaign. It wasn't just talking about something generically. He had a view on how Lewis Hamilton is scrutinised wrongly, as he sees it, for his environmental work, for why does he, some people say, how can you campaign when you get on planes still and drive fast cars? Yeah. But he addressed that and actually gave it a sort of bit of edginess to the discussion, which drew attention to the sustainability campaign and the challenges for athletes. But that was an example of us being able to give a sort of interview legitimately through a brand. And also, obviously, one of the things that often comes up is in terms of brands wanting, to be mentioned, and you've got to work very carefully about how we're discussing on air. But if there's a legitimate thing the brand is doing that's relevant, then it's relevant to show it to the audience and to discuss it around it, whether it's, McDonald's have done a fair bit with us in the last year with some of their trying to coaching and trying to bring more diversity and inclusivity into coaching and into grassroots as well. So that's of course legitimate that they're backing it. And we've done Jude Bellingham and Emma Hayes interviews, through that, and obviously that's given prominence on the channel and beyond.
Yeah, I think that a watchword in PR has been for years is that authenticity. So you can have a spokesperson whom you can maybe work back from a media first approach and realize they're going to be popular in this moment, but they've got to be relevant to the campaign and the campaign messaging rather than just there to badge on air, which would be the kind of worst kind of coverage. I just realized we're kind of 15 minutes in, and I'm going to ask you a few more questions, Rob, and I'm going to come back to that reference you just made to exclusivity, which was interesting. But I just wanted to let everybody know who's watching, we're going to open up to some questions in about 5-10 minutes. So if you do have a question for Rob that you'd like me to put to him, please do pop it in the Q&A box or the chat box, and I'll do my best to put it to Rob. But Rob, you mentioned a minute ago about exclusivity. Again, it's one of the things, again, here at Marketeers, we're typically working with clients who want as much coverage as possible, and therefore we don't typically explore the potential for an exclusive unless time is super restricted with talent, in which case therefore there might be an opportunity to leverage that kind of quid pro quo of giving somebody an exclusive, but therefore maybe asking for a little bit extra in return. Sounds like that was the case with the Gareth Bale example you mentioned a moment ago for MasterCard. Is an exclusive something you often look for, or is it something which is typically suggested by the rep or the brand involved, and then you'll have discussions about that?
Yeah, I mean, some of those I recently cited were just ones that happened to be exclusive and were never proposed as exclusive by us when we got them, and it only emerged after we'd done them or when we were doing them they would be. But that helped to gain greater coverage. But there are many ways of looking at it, and perhaps it's that can be harder sometimes with athletes or clients to figure on that. So it's better to perhaps give another example, which is interview over press conference, which is something which is not always considered. And I think we see this in a variety of sports where they'll call a press conference with athletes or personnel who, quite frankly, probably actually have more time not to do a press conference than they can do a round of interviews. If this example works, there Women's World Cup last year when I was out in Australia, a few days before the final, it's the Friday. So we've already built up to the final by this point because they've won the semi-final. We're already building up. We know there'll be a press conference with Serena Wiegmann the next day ahead of the final. And so it's the Friday, and situation for all broadcasters, what piece do you tell today? Do we just want a player press conference? What do you say? We've already built up. Yes, it seems like a moment, a World Cup final, but you still need something new to show, something new visually to show. That's the key thing. If you've got nothing new to work off visually around it. What was done, and we see this often with the FA, is they did a round of broadcast media interviews with Serena. So very tight, through about 3 minutes each, but we set up on a beach in Australia, Terrigal, in a line, so we could all do 3 minutes. Now, that obviously would want longer, but it's enough to suddenly create an evening news piece and more out of, because it shows an interaction, an interchange. And largely, it's not about getting a line even that day. It's just about building up to the final, showing you have a chat. Visually, you can't do that off a press conference. So we should have done ourselves, BBC News, ITV News, as well as Sky Sports News in a line, one after the other. So it would have taken sort of 20-odd minutes. She had other media commitments too. She did a sit-down off-cam with the papers as well. But it meant that gave big Friday coverage building up to the final on Sunday. And it's visually better for TV. You can build it up better. And, sometimes I think she wasn't doing a press conference anyway that day. She was doing one the next day. But there are some scenarios. We had Gareth Southgate's England squad announcement the other week as well. He did do a live press conference on the Tuesday announcing the squad.
Mm-hmm.
A very few questions. He goes after that to do, again, a line of interviews. So our evening piece isn't a press conference at all. It's me talking to him. We break and put the full interview out on air as well on YouTube and social platforms. BBC and ITV do the same. The papers get some off-camera chat as well, which they turn into more in-depth piece. But yeah, it's about the visual. I rarely ever cover a press conference or one that's seen in a VT because it doesn't look good. It would really, if everyone's all in anyway, it's like, do I really need to be there?
Yeah.
And what strikes me is when smaller elements of sport do the press conference model as well, when they might have like a handful of people turning up. It's like, you'd be better off saying there's going to be a round of interviews.
Yeah, definitely. I think that example on the beach with Serena is really interesting, and it kind of brings me on to my next topic, which is kind of filming opportunity. Now, again, that's a beach, which isn't. I mean, it's great. I'd love to be on a beach now, but it kind of anchors the interview in the location, which is great, and it's not in a press conference room. It's not in a, in front of a branded backdrop per se. So I love that as an example. It actually reminds me of one of the examples which the good people at Ready 10 shared with me on LinkedIn in the last few days, when I popped up a little post mentioning that I was going to be doing this with you, Rob, and asked for the guys to share with me any good examples of work they've done recently that they're proud of. And they brought to my attention the excellent work they did for Kind around the Women's World Cup, where relatively new sponsor, relatively small budget compared to some of the bigger sponsors actually involved with the women's team. But they came up with a great filming opportunity or content opportunity, which was a message of support, which was a giant installation just under the flight path out of Heathrow. So the Lionesses saw this message leaving and saw another message on their way back. It was a lovely community campaign as well, because little bespoke messages were included from fans within the large piece. And that was actually picked up by Sky and also BBC and ITV. So a really good example whereby a kind of fan engagement campaign then becomes a really good installation, which creates a filming opportunity for telly. And it just made me think of, again, other campaigns like the really powerful Women's Aid campaign, He's Coming Home. I think it was Women's Aid, about the spike in domestic violence, which is unfortunately seen around major football tournaments. And it was just such a really clever out-of-home bit of advertising, but creative, which then gets picked up by broadcasters and is a great example of PR as well. Just wondered if you had any campaign, or if you want to talk about those, or if you have any other campaigns where you think actually filming opportunity has made the difference.
Yeah, I mean, it's where the picture is key. I mean, it's not always thought about. One of the things I'm thinking about, and sometimes we do have a linear TV focus, think in the bulletins, but again, I always say it gets repurposed as well on socials, and that has huge audiences. But we're always thinking, what is the top picture? So even when I'm at a World Cup and we're doing an England training day, for instance, it's like, I don't want to show England players looking boring in training. I try and find somewhere around the city, the town, something that brings it back to people at their at home. It's interesting you say Ready 10, actually, because we have done some work with them with the IOC, and and we went out and did some Paris preparation stuff, and they took us into one of the IOC meetings. Sounds dull, but if you say in 20-30 seconds of TV, we're inside the big board the meeting deciding the final preparations, you hear a bit of it for a few seconds, show it, that it takes you in the room. We then did an interview separately with an IOC chief. We then went on a walk around the Olympic Village as well. That walk going round, interestingly, we turned that into two pieces, which they might have thought, it's a bit less uplifting start. One was a security piece, because it's this ambitious opening ceremony, but it helps to draw attention to the opening ceremony plans, which a lot of people wouldn't be aware of. But we always said, we'll do a second piece, we'll keep it away from that. And we did a lighter piece around the Olympic Village, around cardboard beds and athlete experience. And we were able to film inside of one of the final venues and make the point that not a lot needs to be built for this games. And then again, they're doing this IOC stuff. They had an AI summit in April, which sounds probably 1 million of them, or to people, but it was held at the Velodrome here. But because we had an interview with the IOC president, Thomas Bach, we were able to turn it into something as a piece. Visually helped by the fact they'd recolorized some 1924 Olympic footage, because we're thinking, how do we make this not sound dull visually, because we're just in a meeting at Velodrome. That saved it, having that bit of handout footage. of recreating a bit of colour from the 24 Olympics draws people in, rather than here's a boring conference effectively to an audience. And it
That's a
ran as
great example.
yeah. So yeah, that
That's
was
great.
just a, you know,
Yeah,
not
I
to
think
just think about one agency, but I was just, you mentioned them, so
no,
I
I,
just
I think
were.
let's praise where it's due. More than ready 10. I think I think that idea of, again, if it is a conference center or a meeting, just thinking about the other visuals which could be used as a cutaway, as an overlay, as an underlay, for the feature is really astute. We're going to go to one of our questions now. Just a reminder, please do, if you have any questions, pop them in the Q&A. Anonymous attendee, we'll let that go. They work for some of the UK's. They say they work for some of the UK's leading sport and exercise medicine consultants, Rob, who can comment on sports injuries. Is this the type of content you're interested in covering reactively? For example, if a professional sports person suffers an injury in the lead up to or during a major comp, would you be interested in hearing from a medical person on the injury, such as what
Yes,
their
but
recovery might look like?
yeah, I mean, particularly when it's a major tournament. I mean, fortunately, England haven't, or Scotland, haven't necessarily had around this Euros yet, but that's when it's the most newsworthy. That's when you're sort of top of the agenda. I probably would be covering less day-to-day type injury things in, say, the Premier League, for instance, single out football, but certainly when it's a major tournament. But also, there's anything innovative and new that's being developed that you can tell. I mean, you know, one recently, it came through Vodafone, a classic example of something that we only covered because it was pitched and we went there to do it, which was Welsh women's rugby team, national team, and they were doing some work on menstrual cycles and concussion using new inputting technology through Vodafone to analyze it. And that's how you get a sort of a medical story on, because it had a sort of newness to it as well.
Yeah, so I guess in terms of that reactive piece, as the question asks, any kind of, I guess, CG or any kind of any imagery which could be used to demonstrate what happens when an injury occurs, or the recovery timeline, or things like that, as well as the latest in terms of the medical science.
Yeah, I suppose when you're being reactionary, and this is sometimes not even me doing the interview, but sometimes it might be a presenter from a studio. It's, if you're being reactionary, have a good setup for Zoom. If you're being remote, you know, if you have got something medical behind you, a bit like you are speaking now, you're well framed. Move you slightly to more central, and ideally without the headphones. But in terms of the lighting, it's good as well. Unlike me,
we talk a good game, you know.
I'm literally next door to one of our studios, although it'd probably be too bright because
well done for finding an edit suite short notice.
But it would be well set. But yeah, I mean, having a good Zoom setup. I mean, it amazes me even this far into remote Zoom and the like, how many people don't think about their setup. And you don't have to be a broadcaster if you're just internally talking as a CEO or something. This is not an internal thing, but externally you see audio quality is key as well. Audio and light, it's so easy to have a decent setup. I mean, if you want to go that one step further as well, you can hook up a small camera instead to your, SLR, to your to your laptop as well, if you know you're going to be on a lot, or
I think it's a great takeaway from anybody on here. Even if you're working with an ambassador in a short time frame, just even investing in a USB mic for the audio quality, so they're not sitting with the cans on like I am now.
And as you say, a bit of lighting, you can plug that in, and you should get them as low as about a tenner even, and suddenly they, but decent ones for even like 40, 50, they immediately just add that, so it's not that tinny sort of sound.
Money well spent, for sure. I think we have another question in. Oh, Megan, just revealing herself. Yeah, the cloak of anonymity has been removed. Thanks for the question, Megan. If anybody else has any other questions, please do fire away. We're going to spend about 5 more minutes, and then we're going to let Rob go and finalize his plans for getting to Germany. So thanks again for your time today, Rob. Just to pick up on what we were talking about there, in case anybody has any more questions they want to pop in. I think we found here, obviously, the pandemic catalyzed an adoption of remote interviews. We've seen a reversion to broadcasters insisting on, where possible, in studio, if it's a talking head rather than on location. But obviously, as you've alluded to there is still that opportunity to do down the line where appropriate. And again, that's for, I guess, in conversation with yourself, Rob, but also other programming formats across Sky's output. Any other kind of technical do's and don'ts which the guys should be considering with that? Again, you kind of nodded to it there about centralizing the spokesperson, but also, I guess, being mindful of the background. There were some great examples, weren't there, early in the pandemic, of people who just weren't really thinking about what was in the background. Yeah, any other technical considerations, Rob, for either down the line interviews or on location?
Yeah, it's about framing, also not having that sort of kind of looking upwards,
Yes.
that sort of thing. Yeah, it's about lighting, sound, quality. Obviously, internet connection can be more unpredictable, but yeah, it's most important is the lighting and the sound. And you can get small ring lights that I should have on mine at the moment that you clip on to your top of the laptop, even that just give it that extra bit of light.
Good stuff.
If you want to know what I'm currently doing, so I probably should actually say this, I've realised that it's short notice. It's literally the light on my phone that I'm even using. I've got two phones, so I'm using that to light myself. So it's always a backup. And if you're off your phone and you're suddenly caught needing to do a Zoom or something, the thing that people might not realise as well, that you're normally carrying with you a tripod of some sort that you don't realise, because every plug, British plug, you can put a phone in between the prongs, and there you've got it.
What a great hack! Love that. That's definitely. I'm definitely going to take that one away. We're getting towards the end, so I'm going to ask the question which Jake has kindly entered. Jake, thanks for joining today, mate. Thanks for your time. Jake's asking about a client that he works for, who's a top events and ticketing provider. And would you be interested in wider sports business stories, such as ticketing industry, how it connects to sport, when tickets are record-breaking sales or perhaps selling more slowly? And would you need to cover that? Would you need a celeb sports spokesperson, or could somebody senior from the business who maybe has that data to hand be enough for that type of story?
Yeah, it depends. I mean, there's a few things. One, are we trying to build a TV package out of it? Secondly, they could be offered up to the business show, which is twice daily, but is currently off air because it's all day election coverage largely at the moment. And sometimes it can be for the website. And I realize I've barely mentioned the written word. Everything I do has a written article with it. And if it's big enough, it will get push notifications from the Sky News app. And that is then landing on millions of phones in notifications. And some people might only view the written version, or they might then follow the video on the written version as well. So some occasionally stories that I have, and it can be a newsier story, like if it's on more sports biz that isn't going to make it to TV, I might, particularly exclusive, it might be an online only story. There's quite often stories I only end up breaking online just because they don't visually tell on television, but they actually get quite a bit of pickup as well from that. So not to think of us as a just purely TV, very much multi-format, the website, the app as well. So that particularly is something that's worth doing. And I probably should mention, because we alluded to it earlier, just because some might have, and it's something that comes up quite often, which is being Sky News, but then it will confuse people. The Sky will appear on Sky Sports News, and our interviews will appear on Sky Sports and Sky Sports News as well. But we do operate separate newsrooms that do interlink. We're talking to the masses, they're talking more to pure sports fans, obviously. So we need sometimes a bit more show and tell to explain it. We do interlink, but it's always worth telling both of us. Just because you've told one doesn't mean the other knows. And even if, say, because they're naturally, say, on a Friday Premier League focused, building up to a weekend, I'm not necessarily doing that focus. It will feature in our sports bulletins from them, but like me on something completely different. Like the other week, some new cricket investment, even though it was a Friday right near the end of the football season, because we had ECB interviews, government interviews on it. I went and did that because I didn't need to be doing Premier League stuff. So it doesn't always need to be issued today as well. And then, for instance, those interviews were used on Sky Sports because they were quite Premier League and football focused that day.
I think we might have even been working on that ECB and we didn't even prep this, Rob. But yeah, thanks for bringing that up. If there's no other questions, we'll give it another 30 seconds in case there's any other questions. But I'm going to start wrapping things up because I'm conscious we run over it ever so slightly, Rob, and your time is precious. So just, I think some really key takeaways there in terms of if it's pitch for telly, then of course think visuals. But of course, think outside the norm. The visual could be a filming op, it could be content which is being provided. To your point, though, think multi-platform. Sky News isn't just the TV outlet. Of course, there's that huge social reach you talked about, as well as the written word online.
I should give just one final example, because quite a few people bring it up that we took the decision to go to the hardest geezer in April when he finished the run across Africa from the south to north, first person to do the run. I was went there. There was no other major UK broadcaster. GMB were there, none of the sort of the evening news. And we turned it into all day live coverage technically, and it became our online streams alone and views were viewed by tens of millions of people, let alone the on-air TV coverage, which showed a positive story. Mm-hmm. Can be good, although it wasn't actually heavily PR'd. We actually made it more challenging. We had to work out logistics on the ground and what times and things will be, because obviously it's quite organic at times. But it just showed it doesn't have to be negative. That is amongst the most talked about thing that I've done all year and brought back to me, mainly because I was seen running alongside him at the end trying to commentate it live. But within days I was in Paris, they talking about terror threats to the Champions League. So it just shows the variety.
What an eclectic week. Yeah, that was. And I think it's a great point as well. I think a good outtake. It's not just the logistics for the interview or the moment, but actually working with you as a collaborator, as a partner. PRs could definitely do more of that, I think, in terms of understanding the challenges that media are facing. I'm not sure if we've lost Rob, but I was just about to wrap it up.
I'm still
anyway.
Here.
You there? I can't see you anymore.
Sorry, Mike. Some reason it just turned video off automatically. That was like
that is all right. That is that's literally like the bell ringing in the pub. That's our last orders. Rob, massive thank you for your time today. Really appreciate you taking time out of your day to speak to us. Thank you so much for everybody that joined. Thank you for the questions, Megan and Jake. Really appreciate that. You can follow Rob on socials. You can see him on Sky and of course on the social outlets as well. Rob will be following your time in Germany with great interest. Who's going to win it?
This way you sort of go on patriotic. My email is rob.a.harris@sky.uk if that's any use as well.
Great stuff. Thank you so much, Rob. Thanks for everybody for joining. And safe travels, Rob. Look forward to seeing how you get on. Cheers, guys. Bye-bye.